Kyle Mercer was the quiet one, Lena Carter was the loyal girlfriend, and Tony Rivera was the drifter no one really trusted. Three names that meant nothing to the outside world until they were found brutally murdered inside a small trailer in rural Missouri. What happened over the next 3 days would reveal a nightmare no one saw coming, a twisted plan years in the making, and a killer who turned a quiet home into a chamber of calculated terror. This isn't just another murder story, this is 3 days of hell, and once you hear what really happened, you'll never look at a trailer park the same way again. The Bluebird Trailer Park sat at the forgotten edge of a dying town in rural Missouri, a patch of gravel and rusted metal that barely registered on a map. Life there moved slowly. People kept to themselves, mostly because they had no choice. Poverty hung in the air like humidity. Most trailers were old, patched with duct tape and plywood, and the roads inside the park were full of potholes and weeds. No one expected much from the place, which is why what happened there was so shocking. On the morning of October 14th, at exactly 6:47 a.m., a woman named Diane Rollins stepped out to walk her dog, like she did every morning. As she passed Lot 9, something didn't feel right. The front door of the trailer stood open, swinging slightly in the breeze. The porch light was still on. A pair of muddy boots sat neatly beside the door, untouched. But it was the silence that unnerved her most. No sound, no movement, just a dead, heavy stillness, like time had stopped inside. Diane called out softly, but got no answer. Her dog began to whimper and refused to go near the trailer. She backed away and called the police. When officers arrived, they found the trailer exactly as she had described it. Quiet, still, but when they stepped inside, the smell hit them instantly. It was thick, unmistakable, the sour stench of death. The lights were still on. A small TV was glowing with static, casting flickers across the walls. In the living room sat the first body, Kyle Mercer, 28 years old. He was tied to a wooden chair, duct tape over his mouth, eyes wide open in terror. Blood soaked the carpet beneath him. There were signs he had been beaten over and over with something heavy. His wrists were broken. His face was swollen and misshapen. He had been tortured. In the bedroom, they found Lena Carter, 25. She was lying on the floor, her hands bound, a single knife wound to her chest. She looked peaceful, almost as if she'd been sleeping, until you noticed the bruises on her arms and neck. The third victim was in the bathroom. Tony Rivera, 43. He was stripped to his underwear, covered in bruises, burns, and deep cuts. A slow, deliberate kind of violence. There was no forced entry, no signs of a struggle beyond the victim's own suffering. Whoever did this knew the layout of the trailer. They stayed, moved from room to room, and left behind a nightmare. The walls were stained with pain. The horror had unfolded, not in minutes, but over 3 slow, calculated days. The identities of the victims were quickly confirmed through ID cards and witness statements. Kyle Mercer had lived in the trailer for the past 2 years. A quiet man with no criminal record, he worked part-time at a nearby mechanics shop, and occasionally did odd jobs for neighbors. Lena Carter, his girlfriend, worked nights at a gas station off Route 16. They were known as a low-key couple who rarely made noise or caused problems. The third victim, Tony Rivera, was a surprise. He wasn't from the area, and no one could figure out why he was there. A drifter with a history of petty thefts and short jail stints, he had been seen in town a few times over the summer, but no one recalled him being close to either Kyle or Lena. The autopsy reports were even more disturbing than the crime scene itself. Kyle had suffered multiple blunt force injuries over several hours. His ribs were cracked, his fingers broken, and his neck bore ligature marks consistent with strangulation. He hadn't died quickly, his death had been slow and deliberate. Lena had several bruises on her arms and wrists, indicating she'd fought back at some point, but her actual cause of death was a single, deep stab wound straight to the heart. She likely died within minutes. Tony's body told a different story altogether. There were signs of electrical burns, deep lacerations, and even puncture wounds to his hands and legs. He had been tortured, possibly for information, or perhaps simply as part of a sick ritual. The most chilling part wasn't the differences in how they died, it was the timeline. The coroner estimated that each victim was killed on a different day, starting with Kyle. That meant the killer had remained inside the trailer, with the other two victims still alive, continuing the executions over a period of nearly 72 hours. There was no evidence of forced entry or signs of someone breaking in. Whoever did this had been let in. They were trusted, at least at first. Then a neighbor came forward with a strange piece of information. She had seen Lena on Monday morning, alive and well, but by Tuesday night, she noticed something odd, someone walking away from the trailer. Around p.m., carrying what looked like a red cooler. The figure wore a hoodie and walked slowly, not in a rush. She didn't recognize the person, but something about the way they moved chilled her. Calm, like nothing had happened. This small detail raised more questions than it answered. Who was the man with the cooler, and what, if anything, had he taken with him from that scene of horror? As the investigation deepened, detectives began looking into Kyle Mercer's personal life, searching for anyone with a reason to hurt him. That's when they came across the name Dean Mercer, Kyle's older half-brother. Dean hadn't been in contact with Kyle for years, but his name appeared in an old message thread on Kyle's social media account. The last message, sent over a year ago, had gone unanswered. It was short and strange. "You'll see me soon enough." Investigators dug into Dean's background and quickly learned he was no ordinary estranged sibling. Dean had a long criminal history, including convictions for aggravated assault and arson. He had been released from prison just 10 days before the murders. Dean had grown up rough, bounced between homes, involved with drugs and small-time gangs in his early 20s. He and Kyle shared a father, but had different mothers. Family members said Dean always felt like an outsider, harboring a quiet jealousy toward Kyle, who had a more stable upbringing. But what truly stood out was a psychiatric evaluation from 2017. In it, Dean had written disturbing things, ramblings about cleansing the bloodline and taking back what was stolen. He mentioned betrayal and revenge, claiming someone had stolen the only one who ever cared. Theories began to form. Investigators now believed Dean had targeted Kyle and Lena not just out of rage, but out of obsession. Some suspected he had feelings for Lena, or at least convinced himself she had once been interested in him. That fantasy, twisted over years of resentment, may have driven him to murder. The presence of Tony Rivera remained a mystery, but there was speculation that he had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, or perhaps he had information Dean wanted. The turning point came when investigators traced a series of ATM withdrawals made using Kyle's debit card. The transactions began the day after the murders, with the last one recorded in a small town called New Madrid, 50 miles away. Security footage from a gas station captured a man in a hoodie using the ATM. Though his face was partially hidden, investigators were confident it was Dean. He appeared calm, composed, and unhurried. In another frame, he was seen buying duct tape, rope, bleach, and disposable gloves. These purchases confirmed what investigators already feared: Dean had planned the murders in advance. He wasn't acting out of blind rage. He was methodical, patient, and careful. But now, with his face captured on camera, they had a lead. Dean Mercer was no longer just a suspect. He was the only suspect, and he was on the run. Detectives returned to the trailer for a second, more detailed sweep. They had their suspect, but what they didn't have was a clear picture of what happened during those 72 horrifying hours. Something about the crime scene still felt too clean. For the level of violence that had occurred, there should have been more chaos, more mess. Instead, it looked like someone had taken their time to arrange things just so, as if documenting their own twisted narrative. That's when an officer noticed a small, black object mounted near the ceiling in the living room. It looked like a smoke detector, but it wasn't. It was a hidden camera, disguised and wired directly into the trailer's power supply. The camera had been recording for days, and though the SD card inside had been removed, a backup drive connected to the wiring remained intact. Investigators extracted the footage and sat down to watch what would become some of the most disturbing evidence ever uncovered in the county's history. The first clip began on Sunday night. Kyle was alive. So was Lena. And so was Dean. The video showed Dean arriving at the trailer. Kyle greeted him at the door with what looked like surprise and hesitation, but eventually let him in. They talked for hours, shared drinks, even watched TV. It was unnerving to see how normal the night began. Then, just after midnight, Kyle suddenly collapsed. Dean had slipped something into his drink. For the next several hours, Dean dragged Kyle's limp body through the house, tying him to a chair in the living room. He paced, sat, waited. At one point, he calmly ate a sandwich while Kyle began to stir, tied and gagged. By Monday afternoon, Lena returned home. The footage showed her entering the trailer, dropping her bag, and noticing something was wrong. She tried to run, but Dean caught her. What followed was methodical, cold. She was kept alive until the next morning. Tony appeared later that evening, knocking on the door, likely unaware of the horror inside. Dean answered casually, let him in, and repeated the same pattern. The video cut out abruptly after Dean looked directly into the camera. Investigators believe he realized he was being recorded and removed the SD card, but he never noticed the hidden backup. That mistake revealed his method, his control, and most terrifyingly, his comfort. He moved through the trailer like he belonged there, slept, ate, waited. There was no panic, no fear of getting caught. Dean had turned the trailer into a prison and a stage, and his victims were merely props in a performance he believed was justified. Now, the police knew exactly what he was capable of and just how dangerous he truly was. With the video footage now confirming Dean Mercer's role in the murders, a statewide manhunt was launched. His photo was circulated across news stations, social media, and even posted at truck stops and rest areas. Tips came in from all over: sightings at diners, along highways, in bus stations, but none led to him. It was as if Dean had vanished into thin air. What terrified investigators most was how calm he had been throughout the entire ordeal. He hadn't panicked, hadn't rushed. It was likely he had a plan for disappearing, maybe even help from someone on the outside. Weeks turned to months. The case stayed open, but momentum faded. Leads grew cold. Dean Mercer became a ghost. Then, nearly a year later, in late September, a hiker stumbled upon something strange deep in the Mark Twain National Forest. Hidden behind a collapsed fence and a tangle of overgrowth, sat an old hunting cabin. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, the air was still and musty, but what drew attention wasn't the smell, it was the scene. In the center of the cabin hung a rope from the ceiling beam. Beneath it, a red plastic cooler sat on the floor. Inside the cooler were several items: a hunting knife, a black notebook, and a small Bible with pages torn out. Lying nearby was a man's body, partially decomposed but clearly deceased. Dental records confirmed what authorities feared. It was Dean Mercer. The cause of death was ruled as suicide by hanging. The state of the body suggested he had died only a few days before being discovered. That single fact brought more questions than answers. If he had been on the run for nearly a year, where had he been hiding? Who had helped him? And why did he suddenly decide to end it all? Inside the notebook was a handwritten confession. In messy, erratic lines, Dean described the murders in brutal detail. He wrote about betrayal, about feeling erased by his brother, and about Lena choosing someone unworthy of her love. He never mentioned Tony Rivera by name, only calling him the witness. But what unsettled investigators most was the list found in the back of the notebook. 5 names. 4 of them were crossed out: Kyle, Lena, Tony, and a 4th name connected, still alive, living 3 states away. The 5th name wasn't crossed out. Authorities reached out to the remaining individuals on the list, providing protection and warning them of the danger they narrowly escaped. The truth remains unclear how many people Dean planned to target, whether he acted alone, or if someone else had been involved and was still out there. The case may have ended with Dean's death, but its shadow lingers. The trailer is gone now, bulldozed months ago, but the fear it left behind has never left the people of Bluebird Park.